So, good afternoon to all the people in the European time zone. Good morning to all the participants in the Canadian or North American time zone, and welcome to, of course, everybody from wherever you're watching us. This is the second webinar in the 5-webinar series of the EU-Canada Exchange on energy efficiency in buildings and housing. And we're just giving access to all the registered participants. So we'll just need to wait another minute or so before we officially and fully start with the webinar. We have quite a lot of attendees joining us today, and it simply takes a minute or two until everybody is in the virtual room. But in the meantime, I would like to invite you already to just click on the poll on the first question which we have for you as the participants in this webinar today. We want you to answer the question whether you think that the national or the respective provincial policy makers are currently ambitious enough to boost renovation, building renovation, and to decarbonize the building stock. And depending on where you're from, whether you're from Canada or from the EU, I would like you to just either click Canada, yes, no, or EU, yes, no. So please click only once, depending on where you are coming from and where you're watching us from. And if you're watching us from outside Canada or the EU, just click the choice where you think you can make a judgment. And if you simply don't know, then of course there is nothing you have to do. So we'll leave this poll open for another minute until we fully start. And Margot or Caroline, if you could give me a signal when all of our attendees have arrived, then we will officially start with the webinar today. Okay, we will show you the polling results in a moment. We're still getting answers to this poll, and as soon as the results are up, then we will start. We have quite a large number of participants today. I'll have to ask my team in the technical virtual background how many we're expecting. Okay, we are about 200 people. We're probably not going to wait for participant number 199, but we definitely want to make sure that we give everybody an opportunity to just express their opinion, in particular as we're still accessing people to the virtual room. And we have a higher number of participants from Canada today. So we'll see what our colleagues in Canada say about this, whether they think the policymakers are ambitious enough at the moment to boost renovation activities, renovation investments, and decarbonize the building stock. But otherwise, I see the slides changing, but I don't see the polls yet. Aha, good. Here are the results. Wonderful. And then we start this webinar officially. This is the second webinar in a series of 5 webinars. And today we want to do a deep dive into the policy strategies to boost building renovation. So we're really going to look at examples, what's happening in European member states, what's happening in Canadian provinces to boost building renovation. And looking at the poll results, well, we have a different split in percentages. So 51% of all responses believe that Canada is not doing enough, and 24% of the respondents believe Canada is doing enough, and that's a total of 75% in the voting, but there is a clear majority for the result that Canada is currently not doing enough. If we then add the values from the EU, well, the EU result is more or less balanced. About half of the participants say, well, yes, there is enough happening, and the other half is saying, no, there is not enough happening. And that's how you have to add up the percentage figures to come to a 100%. Okay, let's see with the examples today whether there is evidence of this policy action on the ground. But before we really start, I would like to give you just a quick update on the housekeeping on the technical side of things. Now, so first of all, we will have an interactive session twice today for around about 30 minutes each time. What you see on the right of the screen right now is this GoToWebinar viewer through which you can access the control panel. And if you want to ask a question, you can do it there by putting the question into the questions box, and we will then monitor them and make sure that that we will repeat your question directly. We will probably not open the microphones because we will have too many. And if we can quickly go to the slide 2. This is really just again to join the audio, but hopefully you can hear me fine right now. So please submit your questions and comments via the questions panel, not the comments panel, really via the questions panel, which says questions at the very top, and we will monitor them and collect them and try to answer them as much as possible today. So without further ado, I would like to invite our first speaker. Now, I haven't introduced myself. I'm Oliver Rapp. I'm the Executive Director of the Buildings Performance Institute Europe, BPIE, based in Brussels. And we're starting with a session which will have a European focus. Over here in our time zone, it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. In Canada, at least on the East Coast, it's 10 o'clock in the morning. I know it's much earlier on the West Coast of Canada. But our first speaker is based in Brussels. It's Gaspard Demure from the European Commission. He is team leader for the national renovation strategies and the recovery plans, which all the European member states have to draft and to share with the European Commission rather soon. He will talk about the experiences so far. He is with DG Energy from the European Commission. And Gaspar, great to have you today in our webinar. So please, the floor is yours for the next 10 minutes. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Oliver, and thanks to everybody. It's a great honor to be able to speak to you today, not only because it's the occasion to explain what the European Commission is doing for boosting renovation, but also to learn from Canada, who was really a pioneer in terms of sustainable development in the field of renovation of buildings. So next slide, please. Just to give you a bit of background on what we are doing at EU level. So we really put a strong emphasis on the renovation of buildings. The President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, is really putting the climate neutrality by 2050 as one of the key priority of this Commission. And of course, when we are looking at the margins of maneuver for reaching climate neutrality, buildings and energy efficiency in buildings is one of the key priority. Next slide, please. Not only are buildings essential for energy efficiency and for fighting against climate change, but also we've seen that with the COVID situation, that our homes became really central to the way we live, to the way we are experiencing also the change in our society. So we think that we can reach both a climate change objective, but also a societal objective through the renovation wave. Next slide, please. So what is the challenge in front of us? I think in Canada, but in Europe also we have specificities, you know, in our building stock. In Europe, we have a large number of buildings that date back, you know, in the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century, which means that, you know, roughly 75% of our building stock in Europe is energy inefficient. The other statistics is that 85 to 95% of today's buildings will still be in use in 2050. So if we want to reach the climate neutrality objective that we have set for ourselves, we have a huge renovation challenge. For the time being, only 1% of the buildings in Europe undergo energy efficient renovation every year. So the reason of renovation is not the right one if we want to be up to the challenge. And that's you know, for the percentage. Now, if you look at you know, the numbers, we have at least 35 million buildings in front of us that would need to be renovated. So really the challenge is huge, and that's the reason why it is so important to get also inspiration from you, from the provinces, from the different cities to understand, you know, best practices and to go ahead. Next slide, please. So that's the reason why the Commission published in October 2020 a communication that we call the Renovation Wave, with a double objective, a very ambitious increase in the rate of renovation. So we want to double the renovation rate of buildings in the next 10 years. But of course, we do not want just to go for light renovation. And that's one of the key challenges we have in front of us, which is to make sure that renovation lead to a really higher energy and resource efficiency, and not only by increasing the energy gains, but also by tackling greenhouse gas emission, digitalization, and a life cycle approach to building materials, so to improve the reuse and the recycling of materials. So that's the kind of broad policy concept that we put on the table in October this year. Next slide, please. So to drive the process, we have tried to put the focus on a number of key areas for progress. And the first one is the decarbonization of heating and cooling systems in our buildings in Europe. This is a huge challenge. Many buildings are still relying on oil or fossil fuel in general heating system. We also have a growing concern with cooling. So decarbonization and the introduction of renewables in our buildings for heating and cooling is really a key priority. While doing so, we also want to tackle energy poverty and to focus on the worst performing buildings of the building stock. So we do not just want to get to, you know, a result in terms of energy gains. We also want to make sure that you know, the bill for the energy bill for European households is going down. So that's one of the priority area. Thirdly, we're targeting the renovation of public buildings and social infrastructure, because schools, hospitals, and administrative buildings, they do have a kind of exemplary role to play in that process. For central government, notably, it's easier to kickstart the process by targeting the buildings they're directly responsible for. And we are also working in a decentralized manner, very much with regions, cities, notably through the Covenant of Mayors, to target public buildings. Finally, we put a very strong emphasis on technical assistance instruments, because we know that, you know, for households to really decide to go the next step and have energy efficiency progress in their building, they need to understand finance, they need to understand what it means in terms of work, of planning. So technical assistance will really be key. Next slide, please. So one of the other area where we really want to progress is through stronger regulation standard and information on energy performance of buildings. You know that in Europe, we have energy performance certificate almost for 20 years now, but we've seen that the result of this energy performance certificate on the energy performance of buildings is not necessarily sufficient. So we are thinking about a phased introduction of mandatory minimum energy performance standards for existing buildings. This is, of course, a huge challenge because this will have an impact on the housing market, on the way people will be able to sell or to rent their buildings. So we are looking at that very carefully, notably in the impact assessment for the revision of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. But this will be surely one of the major tool for progressing in Europe. Of course, we are also looking at accessible and well-targeted funding. And that's one of the area of my job. You know that following the COVID crisis, we had a severe economic downturn in Europe, and therefore we developed a specific program for recovery, 600 billion euros that are on the table for boosting European member states' economy. In that context, the Renovate and Power Hub flagship components of this program are extremely important. I'm making sure with my colleagues that energy efficient renovation of buildings is really prominently represented in member states' recovery plans. We are in discussion for the moment with EU member states to make sure that they're putting the right program on the table, notably by having the right level of energy efficiency gains. We push for at least 30% of energy gains to avoid just windows change, but to go for an integrated renovation, notably through digitalization, integration of renewables, etc. Next slide, please. So, of course, a key challenge for us will also be to avoid that the renovation wave is just creating more waste or using more energy than the current situation. So we have a full set of reflections on new sustainable materials and nature-based solution. And that's the reason why we are revising legislation on marketing of construction products and also developing a policy on material reuse and recycling platforms. Next slide, please. Very important to us also will be the district approach and community approach. We do not want to tackle buildings in isolation. We think that it is, for the integration of renewables, but also connection to district heating, a neighborhood-based approach is key, notably in worst performing buildings area. And that's the reason why the strategy also includes an affordable housing initiative targeting at least 100 districts. Next slide, please. I'll finish with this slide just to say that for us, the renovation wave is not just about energy efficiency. We also want to make sure that the cultural heritage and the way we feel about our building is at the center of our action. So we are developed this new European Bauhaus initiative. It is about integrating artists, architects, engineers into this endeavor, so that the way our buildings are looking like, the way they work, are integrated in one single approach. I'll stop there. I'm quite sure that you will have a lot of questions, and I'm of course staying with you to make sure that I'll be able to answer these questions. But for the moment, this would be my key elements to present, and I'll hand over the floor to you, Oliver.
Thank you very much, Caspar, for this great overview about the policy framework which the European Union has only recently introduced and is still in the process of developing and implementing to support renovation. And I'm sure there are a number of questions which we'll address shortly in the Q&A session. So the next two speakers are actually coming from two member states, one from Belgium and one from Spain. We're starting with Belgium, and within Belgium, we're starting with the Flemish region. But before we do that, we still have a short second poll prepared for you, which we just want to launch, and we would simply would like you to vote what you think is the most pressing policy priority in relation to building efficiency in your region, where you're coming from, whether it's Canada or the EU, doesn't matter. What do you think is the most pressing policy priority which should be addressed in order to increase the efficiency of buildings, to boost renovation? What is it? I know it might be easy to say, well, all four are important, but we would like to ask you to just pick one to prioritize. That would be great if you could do that. And while the poll is already running, I will just briefly introduce our next speaker, who is Roel Vermeeren. He's with the Flemish Energy Agency. And the Flemish Energy Agency is in charge of developing and implementing policies, well, related to energy, as the name says, but also related to building renovation. There he is the Renovation Strategy Advisor, and we will hear from him in a moment. But if we could show the results now of the poll, that would be great. Well, there is a clear vote for two priority actions. Well, first of all, providing the right incentives to accelerate renovations, and second, to adopt stringent building codes and performance standards. Both answers almost got the same number of votes, 37% versus 39% respectively. And the other two, accelerating electrification and job creation, workforce training and supply chain training, have received a little bit less. So thank you very much for your answers on that. So let's come to Roel. Welcome, Roel. Thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours for the next 10 minutes. I know there is a lot to talk about because Flanders is a very, very active community in developing very interesting instruments. We will make sure that we will have time for Q&A also after your session. So, Roel, thanks again for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Good morning, good afternoon to all the people in the audience. Next slide, please. I will give you just a brief introduction in the Flemish Renovation Strategy 2050, which was made up in line with a European Energy Directive, the European Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. We started up with a look into the Flemish building stock. So Flanders in this map that is included in this slide, you will notice that the Flemish region is only a very small part in Europe. It's the northern part of Belgium, and we made up the renovation strategy for this region. We have about 2.6 million buildings, 3 million dwellings, including apartments, in 2.3 million buildings. And they are good for 13.7% of the total energy use. We also have a population growing older, and I included this in this slide because that's also relevant when you're making up a renovation strategy for 3 decades, reaching towards 2050, because older people tend to live in smaller buildings, more centralized, and things like that. Next slide, please. So when we look into the housing stock, we have a certain division in terraced, semi-detached, detached houses and apartments. But even more interesting at the bottom of this slide is the division, the distribution of these dwellings over the energy performance certificate labels. So we have energy performance certificates, and they're made up with a scheme of letters, labels. You see them here in these different colors, and you see the various shares of the buildings distributed amongst these labels. And if you look at the right end of this spectrum, you see the green part, which is the good part, meaning a label A. And this label A is the goal we have set for the 2050 as a 2050 target. Actually, there are only 3.5% of the buildings that are in line with this 2050 goal. And amongst these, many recent new built houses are included. So the main challenge is to get all these other buildings from the red, orange, and yellow and light green parts of this scheme towards the real green part. Next slide, please. So in our long-term renovation strategy, we came up with goals 2050 at one part for the residential sector, but also for the non-residential buildings. So for the residential buildings, like I said, the long-term goal is the EPC label A, meaning an energy consumption of 100 kilowatt hours per square meter a year, where for the moment the mean label is only the D label, and that's good for 390 kilowatt hours per square meters per year. So that's a long distance between the actual situation and the target 2050. For the tertiary building stock, we have a carbon neutral goal 2050 for heating, hot water, cooling, and lighting. So for the residential sector, the aim 2050 is not really 100% carbon neutrality, but a bit less. Next slide, please. So we came up with the renovation strategy, and just briefly before we go into the strategic parts of the strategy, just a brief introduction in the key points for the residential buildings. We need to implement new incentives for deep renovation in the context of transaction moments. I'll go into that in more detail in a minute. We also have to bear in mind that unburdening and guidance of housing owners is crucial, is essential, and therefore we have various projects and measures included in the renovation strategy. We also work further on the development of the housing passport, which we already launched late 2018, and which is available free for all the Flemish house owners. That's a very, very interesting instrument we have since end of 2018, and which is developed in a continuous way. And on the other side, we also came up with an update of the energy performance certificate. We name it EPC Plus, which included a made-to-measure renovation advice for the houses. Next slide, please. Other key points include more sustainable heating of houses. Also, and that's interesting, an integrated win-win approach with the asbestos safe 2040 measures or policy. And therefore, we work together with the colleagues of the Environment Administration. So that's also interesting in these renovation strategies, that you are really forced to work together with other policy departments. And also, we like to have sufficient attention for other effects of renovation. We call it the secondary benefits, comfort, added value of houses, but also the fight against energy poverty, and go on. Next slide, please. Then for non-residential buildings, we have slightly different key points. There we have to further define the long-term goal. What do we mean by carbon neutrality, and how are we going to monitor it? I have to admit that for residential buildings, we have far more data available than for the non-residential buildings. So that's also a crucial part and a big work we have to do, gain more data on the non-residential buildings. But on the other hand, the policy is very strict on the medium term. We come up with an obligation to renovate within 5 years after purchase of large tertiary buildings. We're preparing that right now. We will also develop a building passport for this type of buildings. And also we are preparing an energy performance certificate obligation for large non-residential buildings. They will have it, they'll need to have it in 2025, and later they will have to meet minimal energy performance in 2030. Next slide, please. Another set of key points is also the exemplary function of government buildings. They go a bit further, and in 2028 already, they have to have this energy performance label. And also every year we have an energy saving goal of 2.5% of the actual energy consumption. And also there we work together with colleagues of the environment sector to work on this asbestos removal action plan. Next slide, please. So if we look at the details for the housing sector, the residential sector, for the moment we have 3.5% of all the houses in the label A segment. I have to add that for the moment we have 4.6%. So in 1 year we managed to see a raise of 1%. So that's good news. But on the other hand, all the other buildings need to evolve towards this label A in 30 years time, and that means just linear thinking, 3% towards this label A each year. And in our situation, 3 million buildings, that means 100,000 buildings each year, and that's very ambitious. Now, most of the time, people tend to renovate in phases, and that means that this renovation rate of 3% in reality will be far higher. We need to renovate, for example, 6 or 9 or 15% of houses to reach these very ambitious goals. Next slide, please. So we came up with some strategic options in our strategy, and the first one is the phasing out of the worst performing buildings. You see that in the upper part of this slide. We need to phase out, for example, the worst performing buildings or the worst labels in 2030, and then every 5 years we plan to phase out the worst performing label for these periods of time. So there we have some obligations that are already in place, but need to develop further. Could you please click on the slides? And then the second strategic option is the use of trigger points. And that's a very crucial one. I go into detail a bit more. And the next is go to deeper for deeper renovations. Next slide, please. And this last one is really crucial because I mentioned the 3% renovation rate, but that means 3% towards label A. So very, very deep energetic renovations. If we do that, then we will need to renovate 90,000 or even 100,000 houses each year. But most of the time, most people renovate in phases. So if you do it, for instance, in 3 phases, then already you need each year 9% of the buildings that undergo one single energy efficiency measures, and then yeah, that will mean that you have to reach 300,000 houses instead of 100,000. And the renovation rate also has an implication on the capacity that is needed in the construction sector to carry out all these works. Next slide, please. In our strategy, trigger points are essential, and for example, the sales and the other transfers like donations or heritages are already good for over 3% of all the transactions, of all the the buildings in the residential sector. So if we manage to renovate these houses, then we already reach a large part of what we need to renovate each year. Next slide, please. Yeah, I won't go into too much detail on this one. That's just showing that if you manage to trigger the potential of, like, for instance, the sales transaction, then you already have done a lot of the work, but you have to bear in mind that also outside of these transaction moments, there's work to be done. Next slide, please. But because in our case, these transaction moments are so crucial, we came up with some incentives packages for new owners. And I have some details in the next slides. I will skip this one. Next slide, please. So we came up with some new policy instruments, like, for instance, a revolving fund with 0 interest loans with delayed payback for poor owners. That's a very interesting one in the fight against energy poverty. But also, and that started this year, a 0 interest renovation credit for new owners, but also a very interesting grant for people who carry out an integrated renovation for the worst performing labels towards the labels C, B, or A, and the amount of the grant is just varying with the depth of the renovation, and that's very, very interesting new system we recently launched. I think, because I see Oliver, I have some additional slides, but basically they're just specifications of these measures. So I think I can stop the presentation right now, and maybe yeah, we can talk about this in the Q&A session.
Roel, I just wanted to say, well, I'm sure, thank you very much. I'm sure there will be some specific questions, because you mentioned a number of quite ambitious and far-reaching policies which Flanders is introducing, such as a mandatory renovation for non-residential buildings and a phasing out of worst-performing buildings. I'm sure the audience has questions, so we will come to some of the details of the policy instruments in a moment. Okay, so thank you very much again. So I said we will have 2 examples from member states. The second example is from Spain. And our next speaker is Javier Martin, who is with the Ministry of Transport, Mobility and Urban Agenda, and there he is the Residential and Land Managing Director. So welcome to you. I know, as we've done an analysis of many long-term renovation strategies in Europe as BPIE, the Spanish one was quite a convincing and impressive example. So I'm looking forward to your presentation and your story, how you managed to put together this long-term renovation strategy and what you're currently doing to really implement it. So thank you very much for joining us. The floor is yours for the next 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Oliver, and to all the audience, and to the organizers to invite me and to give us the opportunity to show you our challenge. In fact, yes. Please, next slide. I'll try to condense the work of many years in 10 minutes. So I will be fast, but I will not stop in the details. Next, please. Well, as you know, the current strategy, the 2020 strategy, responds to the European mandate of the EU Directive 31, and in fact, is the final work, or well, the final by the moment work from the one that began around 2012 with the first step of the strategy of 2014, the next step of 2017. Next, please. In fact, the problem is that we have got a very good feedback from the EU around the strategy, around the measures and the analysis, but in fact, the effectiveness is low. So we have to start from that point. As you can see, we are renovating nowadays around 25,000 homes or 30,000 homes a year, and we have to reach a level of 300,000 homes per year in 2030. So we have to give a jump to change the scale of renovations, and that's a very complex question. Next, please. This is the jump we have to do, and what has to get the strategy. Next. Of course, the strategy has to be seated in a global space where there is the Paris Agreement, the strategic for the framework for energy and climate, the draft climate change law, the fair transition. These are a set of different initiatives and programs and aids, and of course regulatory instruments that are together going for the same goal. Next. In fact, the last instruments goes, as we all are saying, to the decarbonized building park or building stock in 2050. And next. This can't be reached without a public participation where not only the different administrations, the different levels of administration, the regional, the municipalities and the stattal authorities, but also the sector, the different agents that has to participate in this challenge, has been participating in the draft and in the debates and in the solutions and designing all the questions. Next. The first that we did is, of course, reviewing what happened with the strategy of 2017. There were, as you can see, 12 analysis or barriers detected. Some of these barriers were still a priority for us, and another was needed an integrated view. Next. In fact, in this after the 2017 strategy, the new directive of 2018 established a new requirements. Next. And entering in the content of the strategy, as similar in the last, we had a first document focusing on the diagnosis, another document with the goals and the scenarios and the implementation. Next. Sorry, this, well, next. Well, in fact, the axis of work were similar than in 2017. Coordination between administrations, between sectors, between professionals, etc. Information and society, that's a very important problem because of the tenants structure of the property in Spain. Technical, professional and business, regulation, finance is very important because of that structure of the tenants, as I tell you. And of course, public renovation, the example that the administrations have to give. Next, please. And the global scene, we have around 25 million homes, but 19 million principals. And of that principals, we have many problems. More than 3 million homes in buildings in 4-story buildings doesn't have elevator. Almost 2 million homes have conservation problems. More than 13 million were built before the first regulation in terms of energy. Next. And of course, in the pandemic, the situation of this building stock, of this housing stock, has been an evidence. No, next. We have another problem, as you can imagine, is our climate. We have very diverse climate between different parts of the territory, from a continental climate in the north, a Mediterranean climate in the south and east, and of course the Canary climate that is very particular. And that is important for us to target where is the most important intervention in terms of savings. Change. We had to do an analysis around what kind of interventions on facilities, on envelope, were needed to get the optimal savings. Next. Well, as I told you, the basic objective is the decarbonization of the building stock in 2050. So the elimination of fossil fuels, reduce energy consumption in this amount, reducing more than the 30% of this indicator change. And we had a first step in the 2030 where we have to renovate in terms of envelope around 1.2 million homes, and it could suppose around 10,000 million euros, and improving the efficiency of more than 3 million air conditioning and ACS facilities, etc. Next, please. This amount of money, this amount of this quantitative goals needs an optimization of the resources. Next. Even depending of the region, because of the climate, it's not the same acting in the envelope in the north of Spain, where you can get a great saves without determined finance, but it's very different in the south or in the island, where it's very difficult to get savings very big. Next. We had to do the different scenarios to analyze the different combinations of interventions in envelope, in facilities, in both, depending on the constructive typology of the building, etc. Next, please. And also depending of the situation of the owner or of the land. Next. This had the result of which is the optimal cost of the intervention, depending on the result, and where there you can see the graphs that cites the amount of money per home around between 10,000 and 20,000 euros. Change, please. And also we have to make, as I have said, a microanalysis from the point of view of the citizen, depending of the amount of aids that are going to be needed. Next, please. Well, I can pass this slide. It's more what is the result in terms of money for the country, in terms of employment. Next, please. And you can pass this, because the question is that this is working, or this is completely aligned, that can't be all the way with the renovation wave. Next, please. But what is more important is that now we have the challenge and the opportunity also to use this this recovery, transformation, and resilience plan to boost this strategy. Next, please. Next. The goals, of course, of this plan are aligned with the strategy. In fact, we are trying to set to get well, 6 reforms and 6 different investments that that can help us to get the goals. Next. Next, please. And to get the next, please. To get the different targets, we have to change the scale. Next, please. This change needs to act into neighborhoods. We need large-scale urban generation and renewable operations that can achieve savings in a very big amount of homes with the same typological construction and the same climate, etc. Next. But this kind of interventions that even use the urbanism, the new square meters built to finance the interventions. Next. Next, please. But at the same time, we have to boost all the measures that can reach to the citizen. Taxes, deductions, aids, particular aids for the communities of owners. That is a very important problem. Next, because in Spain the structure of the housing of the property is made of small owners with one home in a building that has to take the decision to renovate, and this is really the best or the most important barrier. Of course, we have another lines that try to renovate the demographic challenge to board this problem that is in Spain and in all Europe. Next. And finally, I can pass with this so you can see the presentation slowly. This is very important because we have to give an example from public buildings. We have to take the decision to renovate our buildings in terms of energy, in terms of sustainability. Next. Next, please. And of course, all involved into the Spanish urban agenda, because the challenge also is to renovate our cities, not only to renovate homes or buildings, but also to focus in the cities, to focus in the public space, and to get new cities. Next, and that's all. Sorry for the hurry.
Thank you very much. No, thank you very much. I mean, it is not easy to, as you said in the beginning, to talk about multi-years of work just within 10 minutes. But we have quite a number of questions from the audience about specific issues, and I will come to those in a minute. In the meantime, I would just like to launch another very short poll with just one quick question to all of you. And the question is whether you feel that your country or province has strong enough programs in place currently to implement the plans to boost renovations. Again, make your choice whether you're from Canada or the EU, and respond accordingly. We'll just leave it open for a few more moments. But I think we can already start the discussion, and I'll come back to the poll in a moment. So take your time to just vote. There were a number of questions to both Flanders and Spain, but also to Gaspar from the EU. I would like to start with maybe asking Roel what Flanders is doing really to make sure that the workforce, the construction sector as such, is ready to undertake the renovations and to make sure that this growth in renovation is really happening. And I would also like to ask the same question to Spain, but Roel, if you could answer first, that would be great. And I also wanted to say, of course, we're going to share the slides with you, unless the speakers object, so you can have a closer look at the details again after the webinar is over. But Roel, so the question: what's Flanders doing to make sure the construction sector is able to deliver?
Thank you very much for this excellent question, because it touches really the heart, I think, in my opinion, of the renovation strategies. Because if our strategic exercise made one thing clear, amongst others, then it is that we need to renovate such a high amount of buildings that we need a huge capacity within the building sector. And for the moment, this capacity is fully busy with the actual, how can I say, the building of new buildings. There's a lot of activity in the Flanders region, in Belgium in general. And it goes as far that for the moment, it's even not very easy to find a building contractor if you want to carry out renovation works. So I think we need to come up with a very heavy action plan to guarantee this this capacity in the building sector. And I think that's the good part on all these renovation strategies that the member states made up. Because when we have exchanges with other member states, it's very clear that all the member states are coping with the same problem. On the other hand, now with the economic recovery, it's a huge opportunity for long-time employment. It's a good opportunity within this sector. So what we do for the moment, there are various actions on formation or retraining, training and retraining of unemployed, for example. But recently we got some exchanges with the colleagues of the policy department on vocational training, and the capacity of these training programs needs to be doubled or tripled. Yeah. And also in school programs, we need additional actions. So I think basically the things, the basic schemes are already available, but they, just like the renovation rate needs to triple, for example. Also in this part, it's very crucial that we come up with a growth in the capacity.
Okay, thank you very much, Roel, for this honest answer. Javier, Spain has been very hard hit by the economic recession. What's Spain doing to make sure that the workforce is ready to deliver the renovations? Are there specific programs?
Yes, we'll have to set a specific programs in terms of aids, in terms of tax reductions to optimize the management, because when we receive this amount of resources from the European Commission now with the recovery and resilience plan, we have to manage that. And one of the most efficacy instruments, I think, is a good designed tax deduction. You know? But also they're going to be needed aids. And as I told you in the presentation, it's very important to focus in a scaled interventions. We have to act in neighborhoods where also we have the problem of energy poverty. That because there is a constructive typology of poor construction, without facilities or without central facilities, and that need an urgent renovation, and they're going to need important aids to front the renovation. So we have to focus in that neighborhoods. We have to optimize the interventions to get the balanced finance by the neighbors, but also the private and of course from the administrations. We're trying to set a lot of measures at the same time. So what is very important for us is to show to the people the complete scene, you know, the complete scenario to get the aids or get the taxes or get the, well, that's a very important challenge now in the next months.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much, Gaspar. I mean, you have listed many activities and many political strategies which the EU has developed and is in the process of implementing. Do you see a specific focus on training, on making sure that the workforce is there, on maybe creating innovative business models through collaboration with the construction sector? Is that a focus of the EU policy at all?
Yes, there is a strong focus on skills. We know that, I mean, the cost for companies of getting certified, for instance, for accessing grants is high. So we are working with colleagues in DG Employment, but also EAC, for pushing for specific programs for reskilling or the development of new skills. We try also to put together the renovation wave with the digital policy in the European Union, because it's not only skills in the construction sector, but it's also new skills for the integration of smart metering, of the integration of digital, notably for heating and cooling. So we are working very closely with Connect on that. And if you look at the recovery plans and the way it has been designed, you can join programs or ask for grants both for the digital dimension and the renovation dimension and put them together. So I think this is also a very strong signal from our side to boost new skills in the construction sector.
Okay, thank you very much. So there will be dedicated funding to boost the skills, but there was also a question that what other funding mechanisms the EU is making available to member states to really boost renovation? Because often the argument is, well, it's still expensive for owners, for landlords. It still doesn't make economic sense. Are there specific funding lines which the EU is reinforcing or reintroducing at all? It was one of the questions which came from the audience.
It's clear that for the moment, I mean, the bulk of the work is on the recovery plans. It's true also that you know, this could at the end of the day represent more than, you know, the funds available for the last 5 years in the regional funds for renovation. So it's a huge amount of money that we are pushing for renovation. But on top of the recovery plans, we will of course continue to work with DG Regio and the regional funds. You know that the existence of the long-term renovation strategy is one of the enabling conditions for receiving the money from the regional funds. And on top of that, we will work in the framework of InvestEU to push for programs that are geared to the private sector. So to help the commercial sector and notably banks with guarantees to increase their capacity to provide loans to citizens for their energy efficient renovation. This will be a priority, but of course we are in the middle of the negotiation on the different envelopes. Difficult for me to go further on that point, but clearly we do not want to rely only on grants, and this will be a challenge really to increase the private fundings that will, you know, add up to grants and public money for renovation. Okay,
so the intention really is to have financial instruments which trigger private investments, which make sure that every month, every euro which is spent or every dollar which is spent of public funding triggers additional private investment. Okay, thanks. Thanks
exactly
a lot. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Gaspar. One quick question, but again to Roel and Xavier. When your countries or your region are thinking about these strategies to renovate buildings, do you actually also have the adaptation to climate change impacts in mind? Is that one of the policies you bring in? There were a number of questions going in the direction, and are the energy performance certificates, for example, going to reflect potential resilience standards or resilience levels of buildings? Is that something you have in mind or are developing?
Well, I'm sorry, Roel.
I would like to say that we're only beginning to work on these points, but I think the Renovation Wave initiative is very clear on that one, because it's stressing also this point, and just by doing so, the member states are getting ready to have more attention on these points as well. But for the moment, yeah, we're a bit concerned about the growth in cooling installations, but at the same time, that's an adaptation mechanism linked to the climate change. But we have to work on that as well. So like 10 or 15 years ago, it was no issue at all. But these last years, together with technical developments and the availability of cheap cooling systems, that becomes a concern as well. But basically, yeah, we need to develop other mechanisms or other themes. Like for instance, the color of building materials could be an interesting and a feasible one as well. We have for flat roofs, we have traditional black color of the products, but maybe we can change that into white colors reflecting the sun rays. So it's not always a manner of big measures.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Javier. What about Spain?
Yes.
And resilience?
Yes. In fact, as I told you, we have a set of different instruments that try to, or at least try to link all the regulations, the instruments, the programs, the strategies. And one of the issues is of course climate change. In fact, we have already approved a national climate change law. We have the national also integrated plan for energy and climate, and these are instruments, broad instruments that where we all hang on. So it's very in Spain. In fact, we are suffering determined phenomena related with rain, with very strong rains that has important damages in the east, mainly of Spain, and it's a problem that we have concerns to us at all, and we are focusing on it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to close the European session. As I said earlier, we will make all the slides available, but we will actually also make the recording of this webinar available to all the participants in an email tomorrow. So don't worry, you can revisit all that information. For now, I would like to thank our European panelists. We'll come back to you, Gaspar, later again towards the end. But I would now like to move us virtually across the Atlantic, at least from my perspective, to Canada. Now, before we start the session, we would like to again have a quick poll, one quick question. If we could launch this, please. And the question, well, is a slightly different one because it relates to behavioral change. and what you think would be the most effective way to drive behavioral change towards energy efficient renovations. Again, please pick just one, even though you think more than one is important, but please limit your answer to one. And we'll come back to the results in a moment. So this next session will bring us two examples from our Canadian colleagues. One example from the province of British Columbia, which will be the second presentation. And the first presentation will come from Efficiency Canada. And Efficiency Canada is an independent organization advocating and supporting energy efficiency across many sectors in Canada. But before I introduce you to the speaker, I just want to see what the results are showing us for this quick poll. Well, there is a very clear majority which says we need to make sure that there are incentive programs which really reduce the costs. And then the second choice is that there are one-stop shops, well, we call them one-stop shops providing a single point of contact, a single point of independent advice. And that combination would then really probably trigger behavioral changes. At least that's what the audience is telling us today here. So thank you very much. If we could go back to the normal screen. And then I would like to introduce James Gady to you, who's Senior Research Associate at Efficiency Canada, and who's also the lead author of the Provincial Efficiency Scorecard. So you're really, well, benchmarking the efficiency efforts of the provinces in Canada. And James, I'm sure that cannot be an easy exercise. So I look forward to your presentation. Please tell us all about it within the next 10 minutes. James, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. Great to have you. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Oliver, and thanks for pronouncing my last name right. It doesn't happen very often, so I appreciate it. Hello, everybody. I'm James Gady, the Senior Research Associate at Efficiency Canada, and today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about our Efficiency Scorecard, our Efficiency Policy Scorecard, give a brief look at some of the results from our 2020 scorecard, and then finally I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about the building section of the scorecard and provincial strategies that we find in this area, and our plans for 2021, the 2021 scorecard, and where we expect and kind of hope things to go in the future. Just one note that the scorecard is predominantly tracking activities at the provincial level, and so I won't be speaking to any federal actions to facilitate building retrofitting, although there is has been recently some interesting activity on this front as well. And lastly, if it isn't clear, Efficiency Canada focuses predominantly on energy efficiency policies and programs, and not decarbonization or electrification per se, although of course those are important elements in our work. Next slide, please. Okay, so first off, what is our scorecard? Well, our scorecard is an annual report that we produce at Efficiency Canada. It takes a year to do it. It is tracking energy efficiency policy and outcomes in, as I mentioned, the provinces predominantly, and it's largely representing activities that took place in the year before that it was released. So the 2020 scorecard was tracking and benchmarking policies and outcomes for the 2019 year. The goal of the scorecard overall is to provide a clear and transparent evaluation of provincial energy efficiency policy and outcomes to facilitate tracking of progress and, if it happens, setbacks as well. And we like to think that it helps to promote a little bit of friendly competition amongst the provinces as well. And it's also a very useful resource for policymakers and policy advocates as well. So that's, in a nutshell, the purpose of it. It's modeled after the ACEEE, which is the American Council for the Energy Efficiency Economy in the US, which has produced a state energy efficiency policy scorecard since, I think, 2008. Next slide, please. I apologize if there's any background noise, but I'll do what I can. Okay, so what's included in the scorecard? Well, basically we track policies and outcomes being kind of more quantitative metrics of actual the effects of programs and so forth. We track them across 5 broad policy areas, which are energy efficiency programs, enabling policies, which might not be directly energy efficiency related, but facilitative greater energy efficiency opportunities, building and appliance codes and standards, transportation sector, and lastly, efficiency in industry. So within each area, there's numerous different metrics, and each has a very clear and transparent methodology for how we evaluate it. We then kind of tally up the scores for the provinces and their performance on these metrics, which amounts to 100 points in the end. I should be clear that what scores the provinces get are not like letter grades, so you can't fail the scorecard, just like you couldn't get, well, I guess you could get perfect on it, but that doesn't mean that there wouldn't be any future efficiency opportunities. So just a note on the building section. The building section in the 2020 scorecard comprised 3 main topics. That's building codes and code compliance, home and building energy rating and disclosure policies, and then lastly, activities around market transformation for space heating, water heating, and windows. So for the way that basically, in a nutshell, the way that it works in Canada is the federal government produces these model building codes, and then the provinces can adopt and implement them, and then they're implemented by the municipalities within the provinces. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, just quickly, we also have an online policy database which gives a snapshot of the findings from the scorecard and makes it a little bit easier to compare the provinces in one spot on a particular policy item. And you can access it at database.efficiencycanada.org. I should note that we don't really provide much of the data for the outcomes that we track in the scorecard. The online database is predominantly focused on policy only. And there's a section for buildings. So if I will fail to speak to every policy in Canada across all the provinces, so you could always go and check at our database for an overview of what you're looking for. Okay, next slide. All right, so here's a quick snapshot of the scoring from our 2020 scorecard. You can see the breakdown across the 5 policy areas, and the leader in each category is highlighted in a darker orange. We group we try not to focus so much on the total score, but rather to group provinces by tiers, which is roughly like the 10 digits, the score that they got in the 10 digit. So you can see that we've identified 5 tiers. The first tier consisting of British Columbia and Quebec, and you'll be hearing from a representative from British Columbia after me. The next tier is Nova Scotia and Ontario, followed by a 3rd tier, Prince Edward Island, which also got the most improved status last year, a 3rd tier of Manitoba, New Brunswick, and Alberta, and then finally the 5th tier, which consists of Newfoundland and Labrador. The numbers in the parentheses under the rank show the change from the previous scorecard. So there wasn't a great degree of movement from 2019 to 2020, but we did see some provinces switching places. On the building section in particular, you'll notice that British Columbia is in first place. I'll speak a little bit about that, but I'm sure Catherine will talk more about what's happening in British Columbia. But I do want to point to the variance in the provincial scores under the building section. You can see that there's some provinces that are scoring relatively high, but then there's others that are getting much lower proportion of the total available points in that section. Okay, next slide, please. All right, briefly, I'll just talk a little bit about the first tier provinces based on our scoring from the scorecard, which was British Columbia and Quebec. It was the same, these were the same top 2 provinces in the 2019 scorecard as well. British Columbia's stronger performance stems in part, maybe large part, because of their leading status in provincial building codes adoption and related policies. BC is the only province to date to adopt a stepped code, which sets out progressively more stringent energy efficiency levels and provides a clear pathway toward net zero energy ready buildings by 2030. So alongside the building code policy in British Columbia, there's a number of things that are in some cases actually part of the larger building code process. The province also leads across Canada in promoting building code compliance, and both utilities, the electricity utilities and the natural gas utilities in the province, play an important role in promoting codes and standards, providing training. And this is in part because of provincial legislation that requires a certain proportion of utility demand side management funding to be dedicated towards codes and standards work. Okay, next slide. So unfortunately, I won't be able to, I don't have time and space to give a complete overview of all buildings policies, buildings code related policies in all the provinces, but I'll give a little bit of overview of where we're going and what we're going to be looking at this year. And I think you'll see that there's some, similarities to the approaches that have been described so far. Okay, so in Canada, buildings account for 17% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions. And according to a 2018 report by the International Energy Agency and Natural Resources Canada, the building sector also accounts for 28% of the potential energy savings by 2050. So also in that report, noted by the IA and NRCan, that realizing that savings potential is going to require more stringent building policies, technological advances, and what Efficiency Canada has been advocating for, a generally more innovation-oriented approach to delivering deep building retrofits at scale. So for our 2021 scorecard, we are expanding the range of metrics that we'll be tracking, and we're excited to see, if we uncover information that we are not aware of yet of what's happening in the provinces. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is a snapshot of our kind of expanded building section in the scorecard. We are just in the process of preparing our requests that go out to provincial stakeholders to provide information on these activities. So the list here is finalized, but I have yet to be returned any information about what's happening in the provinces on some of the newer ones. Okay, so the big change here is that we've broadened the range of questions that we're going to be asking provinces in regards to workforce and workforce development and training and professionalization, and tweaking our approach to tracking building performance standards, energy rating and reporting policies, and public disclosure. Skilled and inclusive buildings workforce, from architects to designers, construction trades, building permitting officials, and so on, will be integral to ensuring Canada can realize its net zero energy ready goals in this sector. And this year we're asking provinces about strategies and studies that they've done in this area to determine any potential workforce gaps, and policies to promote workforce professionalization. New this year also, we're going to be asking about existing, if any provinces have whole building performance standards for existing buildings. To the best of my own knowledge, none do, but we are going to ask the question again. We might get information about policies that are in the works here. We're excited to learn of any actions in this area that we're not aware of, and we do see it as slightly different than having a retrofit code. In our 2020 scorecard, we asked about activities or plans to adopt a building code already. Okay, we asked about activities to adopt a retrofit code or a code for doing alterations to existing buildings, and only 3 provinces have reported any plans in this area. Okay, next slide. I'll conclude just by noting some of the results from a study that we've been working on at Efficiency Canada, which we hope will be released in the coming weeks. The study was motivated by the idea that the challenge in retrofitting buildings is analogous to a transition from building cars one at a time by hand to mass production. In short, the current kind of atomized model of doing building retrofitting on one by one basis specific to the building is not very effective, and it's at least not very well cut out to achieving the scale of retrofitting that we think is necessary. So inspired by Energy Sprong in the Netherlands, this study shows through modeling what Canada could achieve through integrated design processes, use of prefabricated materials, expanded use of digital technologies, and so on and so forth, all of which we think would make the user experience a little bit more turnkey and affordable. Based on the modeling that we've been doing, it shows that Canada could retrofit 100% of existing buildings at 15 years, or sorry, in 15 years, at an approximate cost of about 40 billion per annum. That's a big chunk more than what's presently being spent, and under current plans, federal and provincial, what will be spent in the next 5 years. But it is achievable. It just requires a real kind of mission-oriented approach to public policy, bold and ambitious visions, and efforts to realize it. And Canada has a lot of the resources that we could call upon to achieve that vision. So I'll wrap it up there, and thanks again for the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you very much, James, for this great overview. I already have questions coming in for you, but we'll cover them in the Q&A session after the next and final presentation. Last but definitely not least, we're going to move to the beautiful province of British Columbia, and our next presenter will be Catherine Muncaster, who's director at the Energy Efficiency Branch of the BC Ministry for Energy, Mines and Low Carbon Innovation. Catherine, I'm very happy actually that BC was ranked as the leader in the efficiency scorecard, and
we're pretty happy about that too.
And so I'm definitely looking forward to your presentation. And actually, we have given you a little bit longer than the usual 10 minutes. So I think you are aware of that, so I don't have to be that harsh on time. Nevertheless, we want to make sure that we have time for Q&A before the hour is full. So we have another 33 minutes, I should say, of this webinar. Catherine, without any further delay, please, the floor is yours. And thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. Very happy to be here today. And I also want to thank James for the great work that he's done on that scorecard. There's nothing better than having a great advocacy organization constantly on your tail, because it gives us a bit of a mandate to keep going further. So, and the meticulous sort of recording of policies, programs, and all the other pieces involved in energy efficiency that they do has been quite useful, even just at a staff level, for us to think, oh yeah, we're not doing that as much as we should. Let's look at this next year. So it's good stuff. All right, next slide. All right, so some of you will be completely familiar with BC and others won't. So British Columbia, I like to think, is a leader in North America, at least, in terms of climate action. We have quite a few policies and programs in place that have been sort of instituted for quite some time. One of the things that I want to call your attention to particularly is that we have a clean electrical grid. And this isn't by any sort of, recent climate action. It's mostly we're very well endowed with hydroelectric resources. We've had some very large dams in place for many decades, which places us in a good position to be able to transition to a clean economy, because well, there's some pros and cons. On the one hand, we don't have that kind of low-hanging fruit that a lot of jurisdictions have, where they can reduce emissions by greening their grid. Our grid is already clean, so that opportunity is gone. But it does mean that we can reduce emissions from our industries, our buildings, through increasing the use of electricity. So you'll see that's a sort of theme throughout. And next slide. So BC has, like many jurisdictions in the world, ambitious targets at this point. We have legislated a reduction of 40% by 2030 and 80% by 2050. We've had some recent commitments to go to net zero by 2050, however, and we just came out with a new sectoral target for buildings and communities specifically, that is a target of 59, the range, 59 to 64% reduction for this particular sector, which is a lot, and we're still grappling with how to meet that particular target. And you'll see throughout this, sort of a lot of the policy that we've built to date has been focused on a 40% reduction target, but I would say that deeper reduction target is more of this, more and deeper and harder. Next slide. So I'm sure the people on this call are familiar with the market transformation curve, which is the foundation of our clean building strategy. So there's 5 components to that. One is research, development, demonstration. That tends to happen earlier on in a product kind of life cycle. Energy information is important, financial incentives, industry training, and codes and standards. So one of the things that we so in that curve, that market adoption curve is, there are many curves constantly occurring for different technologies, different objectives, kind of layered onto each other. But it's the concept is that it's kind of a continual renewal. We get to a certain point where we lock in the savings through codes and standards, and then we can redirect our funds to other things. And we've done a lot of modeling on how to meet our climate objectives. And one thing that keeps coming up is that it's not possible to do it without, or not possible to achieve our objectives in anything like a cost-effective manner without having codes and standards that lock in the key measures that are required in buildings. So you can see that curve. We've stripped away the details, but the essential part is that at a certain point, you get enough market share, and you lock in those savings and GHG reductions through codes and standards. That red curve, then the spending goes down or redirects to other things. If you don't do that, your incentives just it's just out of all sort of reasonable proportion. So next slide. So starting at the beginning of that curve, we do a lot of work on research, demonstration, development. One of the flagship programs that we've had in the last couple of years is the Building Innovation Fund. So we have a number of funding streams. It's an open call focused on research, commercialization, and demonstration of various technologies and processes that contribute towards energy efficiency and electrification. They're intended, these grants are intended to help companies reduce the cost of those technologies and to improve the functionality, which means that those BC-made solutions are able to provide to provide solutions for British Columbians, so that more of the economic benefits of doing renovations and doing energy efficiency can be kind of kept in BC. So there's more economic development resulting from it. So we've had 2 intakes to date. We've got just found out that we're budgeted now for 2 more years. So we're pretty excited about that. Some examples from the first intake, which are public at this point, is a builder in northern BC designing prefabricated passive house building assemblies. Another example is a demonstration program for deep retrofits in social housing. Another is a retrofit decision assistance tool, so sort of digital tools for commercial building owners. Another avenue for us in this sort of early spectrum area is that sometimes when we pass codes and standards, or we indicate that we're moving in a certain direction, manufacturers have come to us and said, particularly windows, because it's a very local industry, have said this is onerous to do the certifications for this, and so we've stepped up and created a program where they can access funding to pay for those new certifications required to meet the standards that we will eventually put into place. In this case, it's Energy Star Most Efficient designation or Passive House Institute certifiable component criteria. But there's a variety of work that we do in this area. A lot of it's sort of smaller grants, focused on codes, even just like CSA standards, Canadian Standards Association, to make sure that when we are regulating, because we're always looking out towards what our future regulation is going to look like, what are the actual like technical standards that we need to have in place in order to regulate those. And this is work that obviously the federal government does as well, but BC has sort of carved a niche for itself in terms of codes and standards, and so has also played a fairly active role in the certification space. Next. Another key enabling measure at the early stages of that market adoption curve is energy labeling. So we have finally, I'm pleased to say, this fall made a commitment to mandatory energy labeling at the time of sale for homes. This may seem fairly basic, but it's been something that that we haven't quite gotten done for a very long time in BC. So happy that it's now a commitment. At this point, we're exploring models for making it as sort of practical and inexpensive as possible for British Columbians. The avenue that we believe will likely to take is to have a virtual EnerGuide rating system. So technology nowadays is an amazing thing, and you can actually have ratings generated, auto-generated from existing sort of public data, supplemented with a few questions from homeowners. So we believe that will be probably the lowest cost and sort of friction thing, and probably the most accessible, so that it won't require somebody to come into your home, and that's a real benefit in the many rural regions in BC. It also means that we could really sort of take this rating system and make it a tool for awareness more than just at the time of sale. So if someone's getting a virtual EnerGuide rating, it could be, you know, sent out to them on an annual basis, along with information saying, hey, you know, did you know that you have an opportunity for accessing incentives, or did you know that this regulation is coming and you better act on it now before you get penalized, that kind of thing. So we're hoping it'll be kind of part of a whole system that encourages and informs homeowners throughout the life of their building. Next slide. So I'll mention at this point that there's sort of a fairly firm division in our minds. I know this webinar is speaking specifically to retrofits, but in British Columbia, as James mentioned, we have a fairly comprehensive sort of system in place at this point around new buildings. So the new buildings are very important for meeting our 2050 target. But of course, building stock renewal is excuse me, quite a gradual process. And so new buildings, it's very possible to have deep reductions in energy use in a feasible way. When you're constructing a building, it's not that much extra, you know, to go the extra mile and do, you know, passive house design, for example, or net zero energy ready as will be required in BC by 2032. And so fuel switching, at least to date, has been kind of considered a complementary measure. It's you know, you have a building that's really demanding a very small fraction of the energy of most existing buildings, and so it's less important what that energy source is. However, with existing buildings, it's quite a bit. There are so many buildings that exist right now that will still be around in 2050, and of course they're the key stock in 2030. So tackling existing buildings is very important for meeting our targets for GHG reduction in both the short and long term. And in this, you know, we've modeled this over and over again to kind of confirm, but we have found consistently that fuel switching, and that specifically electrification of end uses in existing buildings, is absolutely key to meeting our GHG targets. Energy efficiency, as far as building envelope goes, is a complementary measure. In older buildings that are leakier, we've found that in order to have a heat pump that sort of is satisfactory and meets homeowner expectations, it's great to have an envelope improvement, you know, reduced air leakage, better windows, sort of some basic measures, and that's kind of good to get us up to the level where fuel switching is desirable. But overall, with our building stock, the most important driver, and the thing that we've found that we've needed to focus on the most, is electrification. So next slide. So I mentioned that we have a fairly sophisticated system on new buildings. I won't go into depth in it, but basically, as James mentioned, we have a step code, and the base code is kind of following a few years behind that, so that there's a gradual increase to reach net zero energy ready buildings as a requirement for all of BC by 2032. We also are introducing an option for municipalities to include greenhouse gas emission requirements in the code. So that's in the works now too. Next slide. So in existing buildings, I mentioned that electrification is absolutely key. So if you have a look at the energy, the fuel shares in BC, there's still a very significant amount of natural gas and fossil fuels. The heating oil is a fairly minor one, particularly dirty. But natural gas is a key heating fuel in both residential buildings and commercial buildings. And for both space heating and water heating. So we really need to tackle that. When we did our modeling for Clean BC a few years back, we found that 70,000 homes and 10 million meter squares of commercial buildings will be retrofitted to use clean electricity in space heating. So that's specifically fuel switching that is required to meet our target. And that was actually a 40% reduction target. So we'll need to do more than that now that we've got a higher target. So next slide. Our main mechanism for achieving our 2030 target has been to have fairly comprehensive incentives. So we have embarked on this sort of program, Better Homes and Better Buildings program, which is complementary and integrated with utility offerings in BC. So we are, as James mentioned, we have a fairly in-depth policy framework in BC for requiring and encouraging utilities to do a lot of demand-side management. So the gas utility does measures in energy efficiency in gas-heated buildings, and of course the electric utility focuses on efficiency in electric buildings. We fill the gap. So we are primarily funding people to switch from gas to electricity, which of course neither utility is willing to do at this point. BC Hydro a little bit, but we're mostly taking that role on. So we do fuel switching. We also supplement in some areas where the gas utility hasn't been doing incentives. So for example, we do windows and doors in gas heated homes. And we also do insulation in oil heated homes, which is a small segment in BC, but there's no utility meeting that niche. We have partnered with 21 local governments at this point to have top-ups, so they're able to sort of participate and contribute their funding towards those incentives without having to do an entire sort of program infrastructure, which can be obviously quite a lot of work. Customers are served by an energy coach, which is phone line and email, and there's different levels of service, and sort of basic, and then there's much more in-depth coaching that can be accessed as well to help people figure out what the best options for in their home. Better Buildings is our commercial program, so we have a number of offers. Our basic custom program does energy study funding and offers incentives on a $1 per ton basis. And that's focused on sort of larger commercial and institutional buildings. We now also have prescriptive incentives as of this fall, and an energy coach for smaller buildings, because we know that's a tougher segment, and they often need kind of just simple to encourage them to participate. I don't have it in this slide, but we've also got financing options for people doing fuel switching with heat pumps, and with a rate buy down, which is an alternative to rebates. Generally, we found that financing is a niche product because most homeowners do have access, quite good access to financing through their financial institutions, home equity line of credit, that kind of thing. But there is a certain portion of the population that doesn't have access, or would prefer to access it through their contractor, through sort of a quick deal. So that is a gap we fill. We have had some fairly vocal local governments who've wanted to be able to do PACE financing, so that's something that's coming as well. And we have specialized programming for Indigenous communities, and soon we will be launching a low-income qualified program as well. Next slide. We have a variety of tools. So as I mentioned, Energy Coach and an online platform to help people, which we hope over time will become more of a sophisticated decision assistance platform. Next slide. So we have had some challenges today with participation with fuel switching. We've had more robust participation in other areas, but fuel switching, which is really sort of the plank of our efforts for climate, has been fairly slow to ramp up. So a key reason for this is just the dynamics of the energy cost. Natural gas is extremely inexpensive, and even with the existing carbon tax, the advantage still goes to gas furnaces and just gas technology generally. One of the solutions for that is to have more and more efficient heat pumps through time as the technology improves. The sort of cost dynamics change. Another is to potentially redo some of the rates, which I would say right now are probably not doing electrification any favors. Another key opportunity has just, or key challenge has been consumer education and contractor engagement. A lot of consumers have never even heard of a heat pump, so of course, they're not going to get one. And then contractors, we found a lot of them are less familiar with heat pump technology and prefer to just do sort of a like-for-like replacement. So there's a lot of work to be done on contractor engagement. We have, if you go to the next slide, we have developed a program registered contractor list. So it's sort of cultivating those concepts and doing a lot of training. So even those who have installed heat pumps may not be doing it very well. So we've co-funded best practice installation training and certification. We're subsidizing key courses soon, and eventually we'll make it mandatory to use one of these registered contractors in order to access our incentives. So that's the plan, to kind of encourage the market. I echo our EU compatriots in saying that there's a general skills shortage in this area, and so that's something that we probably need to do a bit more thinking about. There is a workforce readiness plan in motion, looking sort of broadly at Clean BC, but certainly in this sort of space around electrification and heating equipment, there's more work to be done. Next slide. So lastly, as I mentioned at the beginning, locking in savings and GHG reductions through regulations is absolutely key to achieving any targets that we've set out through time, particularly the 2050 targets. So one thing that BC has committed to is to have new standards for building upgrades developed by 2024. What form this will take is yet to be seen. It may be a significant force in encouraging retrofits, or it may be sort of a smaller piece. Definitely, in order for it to be a significant piece towards meeting our targets, it would need to have some component that encouraged electrification and fuel switching. So we'll see how that lands. And then from my perspective, the kind of key piece that will be required is what we have right now is an aspirational goal adopted from the Energy Minds and Ministers Conference roadmap for Canada, actually, which is to have a COP greater than 1 by 2035. So that basically means heat pump technology is the minimum required in all sales in BC by 2035. So that particular standard, if put in place, would be the linchpin of being able to meet our 2030 targets. And that's it. Next slide.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Catherine, for this great overview. Quite some ambitious goals. I noticed that the BC sectoral goal for buildings in terms of greenhouse gas reductions by 2030 is very similar to the one the EU has announced or described in the Renovation Strategy document. So I think the ambition is aligned. I think also some of the barriers are aligned, and therefore hopefully we can exchange on solutions. I have a number of questions coming in. both for you and for James. Maybe let's start with you. You mentioned that clearly one of the solutions to reduce the climate impact of buildings lies in electrification. And so one of the questions is, well, what impact will that really have on the grid capacity in BC? What does that mean? And to what degree are the utilities, the current utilities, involved in that transition? Can you talk to that a bit?
Yeah, so BC, I don't know if it's unique or not, but in BC we do have electricity supplied primarily by a single crown corporation, so BC Hydro. There are a few smaller utilities, but that's the main one, serving about 95% of British Columbia. And as I mentioned, BC is endowed with some very significant large hydro dam resources. We're in the process of building another one, which is definitely a controversial thing. But going forward, BC does have renewable resources in terms of small hydro and wind, and of course we're doing more right now to try to sort of open up our system to allow for more trade, because neighboring jurisdictions, for example, Alberta has excellent wind resources, and there's different strengths across North America. So for us to be connected and able to trade back and forth is an important piece. Generally speaking, there is a fair amount of resource potential for electricity, and so we're not worried so much about the availability of the resource. It will be a gradual process for sure, through time. As as the economy gradually electrifies, we can focus on building more. It's not, and certainly capacity is probably a bigger issue than energy. We're looking at more focus on capacity-focused DSM. So right now we have a pretty amazing system of dams which store energy, but that will sort of not expire, but as demand grows, that we'll need more of that, and there'll be less of that sort of resource available. And so we and the utilities have been looking at DSM that is able to sort of shift demand at different times through the day. As more electric vehicles come onto the grid, that will be a particularly important thing to make sure that they charge at the right times of day. Water heaters are an excellent resource for energy storage in the home. And so we've started looking at technologies that can be and standards that can be applied to make sure that water heaters, at least on a voluntary basis, people could sign up to have their sort of heating of water shifted to different times of day, so that it can kind of act as a pseudo battery. So there's lots of technology options available, and I'm confident that through time, it's a challenge that we'll be able to meet. So it's certainly not, in my opinion, a reason to put on the brakes for electrification. It does highlight the importance of continued conservation and energy efficiency, and sort of a conscious development to make sure that whatever electrification we have is done in an energy efficient way, which is why we focused on heat pumps rather than electric resistance, for example.
Okay, thank you. There was another question related to the certification, to increasing the transparency, which you mentioned. What's the timeline for the implementation, and will you make a difference between the asset rating and the performance-based rating? Is that clear already? Can you explain that a bit, please?
Yeah, so we're in the sort of early stages. We have yet to kind of get policy approval on the particular method for energy rating sort of labeling. But our sense is that asset-based through a virtual EnerGuide rating system will be the most practical in our circumstances. Our hope, though, is that we can have this fully integrated with the existing EnerGuide rating system. So we've been in discussions with NRCan, the federal government, to make sure that whatever system we come up with is compatible, and continue to have a role an enhanced role, I believe, for sort of the on-the-ground EnerGuide assessors. So right now, EnerGuide assessors are fairly, I would say, under-resourced in the retrofit space, but a very growing group in the new construction space because of the way our code has been kind of set out. It requires, you know, blower door testing, and so they've played an increased role in that respect. And I also see with the virtual EnerGuide rating system being implemented, opportunities for people that, you know, want to challenge their rating or prefer to have, you know, more information, that they could kind of do an upgrade and have an in-person walkthrough in place of a virtual system. So the virtual is kind of the baseline. You can upgrade to do more in-person type of assessments.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. James, I have a number of questions on your scorecard methodology, but I can't answer them all, but I'm sure you're ready to maybe also answer email requests after this webinar. There is one which is more related to the study you were announcing and talking about. You mentioned that you looked at the Energiesprong model, which is growing in a number of European countries. And one of the questions is whether you have explored the market readiness in Canada for this concept. Could you say something about that, please?
Sorry, wrong button. So I just want to clarify on the study that I was actually not an author or participant in the study. It was my policy director and an outside consultant named Ralph Torrey. So I can't speak to whether or not, per se, the report considers the market readiness for such an approach. What I can say is that the report is intended to show, with the combination of modeling and outlining what we think is a feasible policy kind of framework or approach, and what the two could achieve together. So we realize that you know, the modeling and the policy assumptions are ambitious, and but we think that it's important to, you know, be bold and to consider what can be achieved, even if it might seem at the current moment that it might not be the most realistic thing. So sorry, I can't give you a better answer. I know there was another question about the timeline, or sorry, when this report's ready. And so I asked my policy director on the side, and he said that it's expected roughly in May. So, and we'll be making about that.
Excellent, good. And well, maybe we can talk about it at one of the next webinars, because unfortunately for today, our time is almost up. So thank you again, Catherine and James, for giving us the insights in what's happening in Canada. In the next 3 remaining webinars, we will do other deep dives. The next webinar will be looking in particular at how local action is being supported action in municipalities. And this webinar series, which is jointly hosted by NRCan and the European Commission, DG Energy, is of course designed to encourage and increase the exchange between the experts on both sides of the Atlantic. So I can only encourage everybody to make use of the information, make use of the contact details, and contact also the speakers afterwards, or contact BPIE with any specific questions, and we will try to link you to the right experts to provide you with an answer. And with that, I would like to hand over the virtual microphone again to Gaspar from DG Energy, the European Commission, to just give us a few closing remarks. Thank you again for joining us. Gaspar, please.
Thanks a lot, Oliver, and thanks to everybody. It was really a fascinating discussion. I'll be very brief, and I like mostly 3 points. The first point is that you know, my impression was we are very much aligned with Canada, both in terms of goals but also challenges. It was really like you know, a lot of what was said is exactly what we are facing in the EU. So I really think Canada is a strong and key partner in, you know, the fight against climate change and also for this renovation of buildings. So we need to continue the discussion with Canada. It's very helpful for us. That's the first point. The second point is very much related to the strength of the initiatives at national and local level. It was really humbling to listen to what has been developed in British Columbia, but also through the scorecard in the different provinces in Canada. Of course, in Flanders and in Spain, the long-term innovation strategies are very ambitious, and I've been through them too at European level. I really think that the renovation of building is a bottom-up approach. So we need to set the long-term vision, the long-term targets at EU, at Canada level, maybe at global level, but where the action is really taking place is at local level. So I think the next webinar you're going to have is really timely and super interesting. Last point, I was very interested by the technological dimension of the discussion today. I think there is a lot ongoing in terms of electrification, heat pumps, connection of the different grids for allowing fuel switching and the larger integration of renewables. I think really the renovation wave and energy efficiency in buildings is a way to reconcile energy efficiency and renewables. So we have to integrate renewables into heating and cooling. We have to use new technologies and integrate digital. That's the kind of next stage in the process. And we would be very interested to listen and to understand also how Canada is dealing with these challenges. I'll stop there, just by warmly thank you for this opportunity and for the honor it represents for us to be able to speak in that context. Many thanks to you, Oliver, to BPIE, and to colleagues in Canada and in Europe.
Well, thank you to you, and thank you to all the participants for staying with us today. Before you press the close button or leave this meeting button, we would just like to launch one quick, very short poll, which is really more designed to give us, as the organizers of this EU-Canada exchange, better guidance how to design and structure the upcoming webinars. What's your main motivation in attending this webinar series? Once you have clicked on the answer, you can, of course, feel free to leave. You don't have to stay for the announcement of the results, because, as I said, this is really more for us internally. So thank you again. Thank you to the colleagues in Canada. Thank you to the colleagues in Europe and everybody else who listened in and contributed today. Our next webinar will happen in May. And as I said, it will look at the local action and the question how local action in municipalities is being supported on both sides of the Atlantic. We don't have a final date yet, but it will be confirmed in the very near future. And then we will, of course, market it through our communication channels and with our partners. So please have a look out for that. It will happen in May, around mid-May. That's the time frame we're looking at the moment. And with that, I would like to thank you all again for joining us. Have a wonderful rest of the day. Stay safe, stay healthy, and all the best. See you soon at the third webinar of this ENACAN EU Commission Exchange. Bye-bye.